Hello there, and welcome to this, the Savage Balance Podcast. Hey there everyone, how you doing? Welcome to this episode number 14 of the Savage Balance Podcast. This is just a brief pre-introduction, I guess, to say that I wasn't too sure if this would turn into a two-parter or not, and it did end up turning into a two-parter, so there's a lot of waffling at the beginning, but I will briefly be back in this form just to inform you of a couple of things that are available. That's about it for now. Enjoy the episode. I'll be back just to mention a couple of extra things, but here you go, enjoy. Hey, hello everyone, how you doing? Welcome to this episode number 14 of the Savage Balance Podcast. How you all doing? I hope you're coping, hope you're finding time to thrive or think or sort of digest the current movements, especially if in the UK, of the lockdown that we're currently in, our third lockdown, although, of course, the second lockdown didn't properly feel like a lockdown, did it? Because certain things were still open and it didn't really feel as tight as the first. And then after that, Tier 4 came in and it felt tighter than a lockdown, but it wasn't being called a lockdown for a little while. And now I don't know what tier we're in. And I don't know what lockdown we're in. Is it the second? Is it the third? Is it, I don't know, the fourth? Have I missed a lockdown? Anyway, I hope you're all coping okay, and I hope you're finding time to really think and process things through and not getting too frustrated with the sort of current up and down nature of where we are with it all. I'm going to try and keep this podcast concise. I'm going to try, because I've made a lot of notes and there's a lot of things that I would like to talk about. But it may well be that this is a part one of part two. This may be an extremely long episode. There may be an extra one coming out tomorrow or next week. I don't know yet. I'm going to record it first and see what happens. This is the sort of stuff that doesn't really need to be involved in the chat, does it? You don't really need to know about this stuff. I'm letting you know about it anyway. I'll tell you what, I've recorded this a few times and I think I know what it is. I keep jumping backwards and forwards and I think I put a neck warmer on and it was quite nice. It was quite warming on my neck, but I think it's a bit too warming and it's kind of restrictive around the throat. And now, I wonder how much freer I feel now. I've taken it off. I don't know if it was audible or not, but in fact, you know what? That's what it is. There's two things around my throat. There's my mask is around it. I've got a beard mask, as I am a human being with a beard. When I was wearing another mask, it was sort of cutting into the beard and creating this sort of triangular kind of, I don't know, obtuse angle coming out of my face, very direct and a very definite line. So my partner got me a beard mask and that covers my beard as well as my face and keeps me safer in that way. But I think it was just getting a bit too much around my neck, especially as I'm in a firm favourite recording studio of mine, which is a kind of duvet cocoon within the corner of my bedroom where the clothes are. Perhaps there'll be a photo of this on Instagram, as it's something I seem to enjoy doing, taking photos of my recording studios. My favourite one being a towel over my head. That was enjoyable. This is an example of the kind of conciseness I was talking about, keeping it concise and to the point, you know. Don't want to go off rambling about things that aren't important. Keep it concise. Talk about lockdowns, talk about cocoons, and talk about neck warmers. That's the tone of what I'll be going for. This is going to be a long one, isn't it? Let's jump into what I want to talk about. I guess you've already got a sense of what this is about by the episode name. But I'll break it down for you a bit. As I mentioned before, we're in lockdown. This is our third lockdown, and I guess things have been getting a bit repetitive. Although I'm having work coming in and out, I was made redundant before, so I've been spending a lot of time at home as well. a lot of time with my partner. And it's an idea, I'm not sure who came up with it. We've spoken about it together, but we thought it would be nice to do more things together of the evening. Like we used to listen to more music and such, but there's a lot of being in front of the telly, which is great. Don't get me wrong. I love watching a good film or a really good series. In fact, we're watching This Way Up at the moment by, what's that, Aisling B's sitcom. 2 episodes in, I'm really enjoying it. But yeah, it's great to have that time, but it's also nice to do more things like chatting and things that tend to take a sidestep. So we sort of talked about it together, and we thought it would be a nice idea to get a console, some kind of gaming console. Something that was, had a twinge of nostalgia, but also would just be fun to play together and a bit of time together and a bit of bonding time so we could talk and we could be engaged in and get multiplayer games and try to resist, single player games and stuff like that. And just a few basic ones, not anything too excessive, try to keep it fairly cheap. And we thought this would be quite a fun thing to do. So a lot of that has arrived recently. We've got it. This is a couple of days into getting it all, and which is great. And I thought, while we were doing this, one thing that I would feel sad if I missed out on would be a chance to get a football game. I used to love them as a kid and as a teenager. Certain football games I just would spend a long time playing on, and I thought that would be fun and nostalgic, and maybe we could play together. But also, every now and again, maybe I can jump on and play a couple of games there. I thought that would be a nice little thing. So I've got one. I got Pro Evolution 6 because that was about the most up-to-date one that I could get at a rock-bottom price. This is on the PlayStation 2, by the way. Little plug for the old PlayStation there. Maybe they'll send me a free PlayStation console-ing game or something. I don't know. I don't even know what they're called anymore. What number are they on? 5? What number are they on? What are they doing? What are they doing, these PlayStation people? What are they doing with their lives? God, I bet it's on number 44 now, isn't it? Because they do so many of them. I think it's 5. I don't know. I don't keep up to date with them. Anyway, so I've got that. And I've played a couple of games. I've played 2.5 games on it. I'm still remarkably rubbish. I'm on the middle level, and I haven't yet scored, and I've lost all the games I've played, which is quite fun. And I just started a league as well. I'm one match into a league in which I am, well, of course, for people who know Pro Evo, they don't have the official names of teams, so I am South East London Reds is what I am. A team that includes Darren Bent, Marcus Bent, Holland, Romadol, who else? Hasselbank is in it. Carson, I think, is the keeper. I'm literally going off of the names. I would not have been able to tell you any of this before, but I just literally saw it yesterday. So anyway, that's Charlton, for those of you who don't know, because that's my dad's team. Well, it was my dad's team. So I thought that would be the team I'd want to be. And, one game into a league, fine, a bit of fun. What I'm noticing already is these big kind of impulses rising back up, these addictive, I should say, impulses rising back within me. I'm feeling that urge to be on it. I've worked a lot today on this podcast, more than I have done on other ones, and most of the day I've mainly been thinking about when I can play that game, when I can get back on it. It's my partner's birthday tomorrow as well, and I'm already, thinking when's the next time I'm going to get to play it. These little voices are there in the back of my head. A big moment for me recognizing that was waking up in the middle of the night last night, and bearing in mind I'm only one game into this league, and wandering to the toilet, and just in between the bed and the toilet, my kind of inner dialogue managerial voice started talking about Darren Bent's performances and what Hasselbank can offer and how we're good defensively, but we have to work on our attacking. Like a manager, it just started up. That impulse was already there. Like it was pretty clear. And it reminded me of something I think I mentioned on a previous podcast as an episode I'd like to do, to talk about, which was sort of my relationship with the game Football Manager. In fact, I should have mentioned at the beginning of this, a bit early on, so maybe I'll record a little disclaimer thing, not a disclaimer, a little note at the beginning. before I talk about all this, which is that if you're not into football, don't worry, this is not a football-heavy podcast. This isn't really Football Manager is the means in which I'm talking about the subject. So don't be put off by the idea that it's football, because that's not the essential part. But I mentioned before that about my relationship with Football Manager and how I found it very much an addictive game, what it did for me, what my relationship to it was, how it sort of really took over a big part of my life. I don't think this is uncommon either. I think there are a lot of male socialized people who find this to be true as well, that you can really whittle away the time on Football Manager, which is funny. There's a person who's done a show. In fact, I'm going to try my best to stall while I try to find the name of this person, because this was another thing as well. I didn't have time, unfortunately, but I wanted to watch this person's show because there was a person who did a stand-up show. I'll put a link to this in the show notes so you can watch it. Maybe we can watch it together at some point. Don't know how that's going to work. Anyway, there was a person who did a show that's called Football Manager Ruined My Life. And as I say, the link will be in the show notes. I'm just trying to find it now because I want to name of the person who made it. Tony Jameson. His name is Tony Jameson, and yeah, he's a comedian. It's an hour-and-a-half show that's on his YouTube called Football Manager Ruined My Life, talking about this. And I think it's a pretty common thing that it's a geyser. And essentially, it triggers off thoughts about addiction and what addiction means to me, and what addiction is, really. I guess there's a certain tongue-in-cheekness to it, that how it feels like to present it in this way. But I think it's a pretty significant thing that a lot of people experience. So I thought it would be fun to tackle ideas around addiction and certain thoughts and feelings and theories around it through the guises of my relationship with Football Manager, which in its prime time would see me playing it, I'd say a good 14, 15, 16 hours a day. Literally waking up, literally the first thing, maybe even before going to the loo, straight to the Mac at that age. This is probably about 15, 16, 17, 18 kind of age. And just jumping straight on it and being involved in it and only playing it, and even playing it while I was, eating and not taking any time off of it. And this wasn't just like every now and again, this was weeks and months on end, all through summers when I, at school, when arguably you could be out spending time with friends and such like that. But I think I would have much preferred, not to any detriment of my friends at that time at all, but because of my relationship with this game, that I would have sacrificed being with them to be on this game. So I think that it has that damaging aspect to it. Well, maybe a good place to start is a definition of addiction. And Dr. Gabor Mate, who is an expert in the field of addiction, categorizes addiction as a behavior, substance or not related, that a person craves, finds pleasure in and relief in, despite experiencing negative consequences, and cannot give it up despite those negative consequences. So basically, the behavior that someone craves, that gets pleasure and relief in, despite the negative consequences. And, as an example, let's take the Football Manager. Yeah, I think so. I'm already experiencing the craving now for the Pro Evolution Soccer 6 football game on the PlayStation 2, but it really brings up those thoughts about how for the last year, like I passed Football Manager, or I've Googled how much it costs, or if I can get it for free, how much space it requires on my laptop. Even at one point went into a charity shop in which they had about Football Manager 10 to Football Manager 20, or however I can't remember. I think it's done by year, isn't it? I'm not sure how they actually phrase it. But they were all there and they were all cheap and they were all accessible, and it took a lot, and I had to physically remove myself from the shop because I knew all the things I wanted to achieve at that point. I hadn't started the podcast. I'm in a relationship and I want to see friends, and I've got a lot of things going on, a lot of which I want to simplify. And yet if I introduce this game into my life, it would take over. So, that's the negative consequences for me. Let's run through this definition and compare it with Football Manager. So addiction is a behavior, substance or not. So that's Football Manager. that a person craves, finds pleasure in, or relief in. Yep, absolute relief, absolute pleasure, and definitely the cravings are there. I think about it in a futuristic, pushing it forward to the future. Despite experiencing the negative consequences, so in my experience from it, not seeing friends, sometimes, skipping meals, skipping things, being distant from my own thoughts and feelings, not processing them, and outsourcing those feelings to this game. And then finally, and cannot give it up despite those consequences. So I know that even within that room, even within that space, if I was in an environment in which it was in, like if I could go on it right now, it would be hard to make the choice to not play it. That impulse would be there, and it would be too strong to not choose to do it. So it fits perfectly into that model of addiction. And it's not simply about compulsion, it's the relationship we have with compulsion. I guess a lot of people think any addiction is just a compulsive habit. But if you look at someone with OCD, that doesn't fit that model of the idea of somebody who's the craving and the pleasure and maybe potentially the relief, but the craving and the pleasure is not there. Say, for example, someone who has to wash their hands 100 times. This is something Gabor Mate said himself, actually. If you have to wash your hands 100 times, not 99, 100 before you leave the house, that is not a craving, as craving is, and is certainly not a pleasurable thing. So even though the compulsion is there, it's not that. So it's the relationship to that impulse, the negative thoughts as well. That's a good example that... if you have kind of compulsive negative thoughts, again, you're not getting that craving, you're not getting that pleasure from it. At least most people won't be getting that pleasure from it. So compulsion is certainly an aspect, but it's not the whole picture. And in fact, Russell Brand, I guess, as to expand outwards, has classed addiction as a kind of replacement for connection and for a replacement for a spiritual experience, although spiritual is a word. I think I'm going to mention it later. I made a note of it later, but I'm going to do a separate podcast at some point about the word spiritual because of the many ways it can be interpreted and what people think it means and stuff. And in fact, Rich Roll would say himself that alcohol wasn't the problem, it was the solution, basically meaning that his lack of connection or his lack of spiritual experience or the thing that he was missing was being fulfilled by the alcohol in his life. Obviously, the problem is then what the alcohol brings in and all the negative consequences and not being able to stop despite those negative consequences. Just going to have a little sip of water. I've got a real strange throat. I've got a little bit of a tickle there. And I think it's going to be in it for the long haul. I think it's sticking round. I think it's going away. So yeah, I like that definition of addiction, and Football Manager for me certainly fits in that. And even to an extent, I'm learning more and more this Pro Evo game. It's not so much FIFA. I didn't like the way that people moved in FIFA. There was a kind of a delay in turning and stuff like that. So maybe it's more realistic, but I didn't like it. I think it probably all started in that sense with Iss Pro Soccer 98, for those who remember that. International Superstar Soccer Pro 98. I think that's its whole name. Based around the World Cup and such. It was one of the first games we ever got, and I bloody fucking loved it because it is bloody fucking great. In fact, it's one of the only discs. At one point we had Grand Theft Auto and it got a tiny little scratch on it, and that meant that the game would freeze after 10 minutes and it wouldn't play. Whereas Iss Pro on PlayStation 1, dropped it, great big chunk out of the disc, a literal great big shard came out. All that happened is every now and again the music wouldn't work. So it's resilient too. But it certainly wouldn't be... I'm saying this like Football Manager as the way in and Pro Evo. These impulses are definitely elsewhere in my life as well. Maybe I'll scatter these talks out throughout it. But sort of, I can tell that it's sort of coping mechanisms in certain ways for me and ways of coping because it's kind of there present at certain workplaces I've been, like at pubs, for example, pubs that I've worked at. When you get to the end of the night and you're working in conjunction with the kitchen, it's usually someone's job to polish the knives and forks, so they've already been washed. but maybe a vinegar solution will be used and you rub over the knives and forks and then you put them in the appropriate trays. That's a normal thing that happens at a few places I've worked. And whenever I was in that environment, I would end up playing a game of knives versus forks, where essentially I would have the pot in front of me and I would try to pick them up at random. And if I picked up a knife, that was a point to the knife. If I picked up a fork, that was a point to the forks. If I picked up a knife and a fork together, then no one got any points at all. And once somebody got to 10, that gave them 1 point. So if knives was, on 9 and forks was on 4, and then I picked up another knife, that's 1 point to knives. And then by the end of all of that tray, whoever was in the lead would get a point. And I would remember this and I would do it. I would have that in the back of my head. And then the next time it was my job to polish the knives and forks, I'd be like, again, that what I mentioned before, that managerial inner dialogue, actually is more of a commentary inner dialogue. And I'm there going, well, forks have struggled in recent because knives they have the extra players, they have the extra facilities to function and to really push these things forward. But the forks, they got a good chance. And if they can just take away a few of those edges and win a couple of those really tight matches, then they're in with a good chance of getting back into this game. That's going on in my head. And this is, I think, a coping mechanism for me being in an environment which I'm very uncomfortable in, which is flagging up a lot of difficulties for me. And I'm finding some kind of external source to get pleasure out of. And again, going back to that model we were talking about before, that a person craves. So I was craving it. It would be like, oh, someone's got to do the knives and forks. There we go. The trigger's in my head, the craving's there. I want to reenact. I want to do that. Find pleasure and relief. And I'm certainly finding relief from the situation that I'm in. And I'm getting a lot of pleasure out of it. And I'm remembering all this stuff. And, despite the negative consequences, you could argue that there are sort of small negative consequences there, that if somebody would ask me to go and perform a task, I would be a bit resistant and hesitant and I wouldn't want to do it. And if someone was talking to me about something genuine and real that they were experiencing, I'd be a little bit separate because I'd be trying to remember knives 2, forks 3, knives 7, forks 4, and remember the scores. And the thing is, I guess, cannot give up despite those negative consequences. I did give it up quite easily. Just when I wasn't in that experience, I wouldn't do it. So maybe it's not exactly that thing, but I guess what I'm saying is the tendency and the impulse for me to change small little things into big, overblown games is there, especially when it involves statistics. For some reason, I'm not sure why, I've got this real fondness for statistics. That's one of my favourite things about football, is going and looking at the tables and stuff like that and seeing goals for, goals against. They've got 2 games in hand. If they do that, they'll be 2 points behind. And then I know in 2 weeks I'll be playing them. So these are the things that excite me about it. I'm not so bothered about watching the game itself, but the statistics and seeing how many games are left and the weather conditions. And these are the things that excite me for some reason about it. Maybe I'll give you some more examples later on about different games that I've found statistically that are like Football Manager that I've used to kind of replicate that. But Football Manager has certainly become a bigger thing in my life, especially in the last year. And I can certainly trace it back to this last year for me struggling a lot more. So this is an old coping mechanism kicking in, and it's giving me at least the thought of it, or what I remember my relationship being with it before, is that I will get validation from it. I'll get the validation I need from this game. And again, I know that it impacts my personal life. This is why I have to keep a healthy boundary from it as much as I can. And well, this is one of the questions, actually. I don't know if it is a healthy boundary because it's on my mind a lot. But I don't know if there is a place for it in my life, or if the way I'm treating it, as in like complete abstinence in a way, is damaging itself, whether there is space for a healthy relationship. Anyway, that's something I will get to later for sure. But the reason I wanted to talk about this in terms of addiction is that I guess we have an idea in our society and in our culture of what addiction is, and it's usually sort of a big 4 kind of thing. There's smoking, there's drugs, there's alcohol, and then caffeine might be there for people, but that's a bit more tongue-in-cheek, and maybe sex addiction, but again not really understood as much. And people have issues with eating, but they're not so much addiction. It's mainly alcohol and drugs are obviously the big understood ones. But what I've done is I've made a list of types of addiction, because addiction isn't so much the external phenomena. It's not the external thing that you're attaching yourself to. It is the internal compulsion, and it depends on which way it can show off in any number of ways. So just to see if maybe some of this chimes with you, maybe it doesn't, but different types of addiction can include, but are not limited to, smoking, gambling, caffeine, sugar, chocolate, eating, work, sex, pornography, masturbation, gaming, the internet, shopping online and in real life, spending money impulsively, your phone, social media, exercise, alcohol, drugs, both illegal and prescription, codependent relationships, thought patterns, and even in Mae Martin's case, Bette Midler. She's got a great show about being addicted to Bette Midler when she was 6, and there'll be, again, link in the show note to that. But that there is a very big comprehensive list, but it's not limited to those things, because if the behavior that you find yourself engaging in meets that criteria for what we said the definition of addiction was earlier, which is, again, that behavior, substance or not, that a person craves, finds pleasure in and relief in, despite the negative consequences, and cannot give it up despite those negative consequences. It doesn't matter what the external thing is. The internal journey of that is why it's there. Because even cheese has its own addictive tendencies, because it contains natural opiates and casomorphines, which belong to the opium family and the morphine family. So they're in the company and they're in the families of highly addictive substances, with opiate receptors regulating things like pain management, sedation, euphoria, dysphoria, appetite, a lot of these things that are recognized and go hand in hand with addiction. Of course, euphoria and dysphoria, pain management, a lot of those things, that's how a lot of addictions may start. Sedation, a kind of numbness, being knocked out. And they say that is in there potentially because it's there to encourage the baby calf back to its mother. So it's a kind of an addictive substance that's in there as a bonding exercise. So the child, the calf, craves its mother's milk, craves the cow's milk. So it goes back, so it'll be fed. So, evolutionarily, that works out well. But I'm talking about this through Football Manager. But for me, I'd say I've sort of noticed and understood certain addictions I would characterize in my life. Some are much more, I think for a lot of people, there's certainly scales. Russell Brand talks about it. He's been on many different scales. You can go from heroin and hard drugs to sex and his relationship with that, to masturbation and pornography, to relationships. He's recognized it a lot there. And I think the scales can be both personal, like what your relationship to these things are, and social, where we would, I think, socially say that heroin addiction is a much higher addiction than, for example, shopping, although I don't personally agree with that, but it's sort of there in the culture, isn't it? It's sort of an idea that persists, that if you are addicted to heroin, that's much more serious than if you're addicted to shopping, when actually those two people will have a lot more in common than we'll usually give them credit for. So those are there, but this is a sort of personal scale for me, which is that this isn't exact. I wouldn't call it necessarily addiction, but I've had small issues, very small issues with alcohol in the past, and slightly bigger, but again small things with caffeine. So these are things that I have found it best in my life to not be ingesting anymore, to not have as part of my life. Caffeine, it wasn't the most addictive. I'm sure a lot of people have higher addictive things, but I was having a fair few coffees. For me, it was 3 really heaped black coffees and a couple of energy drinks a day. And then I was also wondering why I was tired all the time and not being able to stop. Again, going back to that definition, not being able to stop the negative consequences. I was having the energy drinks and it was making me feel sick, and I wasn't even enjoying the drink. And I was feeling tired all the time, and yet it was a behavior that I was persisting in and continuing in. So it really, for me, I recognised that at some point and found space to not have it in my life anymore. And I've certainly felt the benefits of that. Me personally, that is. Another one again for me is smoking. I smoked, I'd say, for about 5 years. Again, not a light social smoker, but also not the kind of heavier smoker that you've heard of before. And I always had some voice in the back of my head that said if I started to get a cough, good timing, good timing there, cough. Gonna have a little sip of this water. I'm not editing out water sips. So if you're not a fan of water sips in podcasts, then they won't come often, but I do apologise. I kind of apologise, but would you rather me drink a bit of water every now and again? Or would you rather me talk like this and keep going? I'm addicted to Football Manager. I'm addicted to Football Manager. Which one would you rather? I know which one I'm giving you anyway, so there we go. But yeah, smoking, probably... I'm not 100% sure. I didn't ever count, but I'd say a good 15 a day would probably be what I was having for about 5 years. I think that's about right. And again, I felt those things. Luckily, I had that voice in my head that if I started to get a persistent cough, it wasn't worth me continuing. And then as it started to come and it started to be more persistent, I felt like, right, I need to do something about it. And I did something about it in my own personal way, which maybe won't work. There's definitely examples and evidence out there that different people respond to different stimuluses and stimuli depending on, or different solutions to that problem, depending on who you are. Some people do it gradually. I sort of did it gradually, going every now and again, no pressure. If I smoke one, that's okay. Just remember to stick on this path and try to limit them as and when. And some people need to, go cold turkey and stop overnight, whatever works for you in that sense. But smoking is another thing. Probably my biggest personal addiction, other than Football Manager that we're talking about, for me personally, is pornography. And I won't talk about this too much because I would like to do a separate podcast on it at some point, a relationship to it, and the way that works with the current climate in which people talk about, sex workers and promoting pornography in that way, which is very interesting. And, there's a lot to agree with. I find there's stuff to disagree with too. And so I want to talk about it in a different sense, but it's probably the thing that I struggle with most in terms of addiction, and took me a long time to, one, recognize it was an addiction, to see the actual impact it was having on the thing that was impacting most was my relationship, and, how I had to come away from it and what it was doing in my life and what it was keeping me away from. So that's probably my biggest addiction. Also, though, if I'm talking about addictions that I'm going through and I'm talking about Football Manager, another game that I would play is, and now this one might be a bit embarrassing because people might listen to this who still work in that environment. And I haven't told anyone about this in that environment because I find it embarrassing to talk about. But essentially, I worked at a Whole Food warehouse. I'm also there currently, back and forth a bit there as well at the moment. And at the time, they had a bagging section. This was a section where we would bag big Whole Food things from 25 kilo sacks down into 10 kilos, 5 kilos, 1 kilos, and all of that sort of stuff. And I didn't want to be there at first, but it's fine. I didn't mind, and it's part of work, and it meant there was another job I was doing to hopefully get me more shifts. So I started doing it, and I just started noticing patterns and started picking things up, mainly through country of origins. And very soon that started to develop into a bit of, there would be about 18 things that you could write down when you're cataloguing things. You would write down where they're from, and part of that would include country of origin. And I was noticing, there's 3 Chinas there, and there's 3 Canadas there. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, there's 4 Canadas. There's 5 Chinas. And then I'd go, that's almost like 1-0, and then that's 1-1, and Turkey there. Before I knew it, it had sort of developed into a full-on league that I developed, a league that would involve basically being not cheating, being at the beck and call and the will of what would be put on the bagging list, as in if someone needed something bagging, they'd write it down and you would perform it for them. What needed to be done in terms of stocking the shelves to make sure they were stocked up. But I was basically becoming fully addicted to this bagging game, cataloguing who was winning. When someone got for the first country to get to 10 was the overall winner. I developed games, I developed systems in which I wasn't cheating and it would be open to interpretation what happened. I took it really seriously, and then it started to develop into organic as a separate league and non-organic as a separate thing. This is all while I'm working. I was definitely getting the work done, so you don't have to worry about that. I was definitely working, but in fact, at some point, it helped inspire me to work harder because I wanted to get certain things done by the day so I could keep a log of it and note it. But that took over my life for a long time, and then Tuesdays for me really became a day where I was excited. So again, if I catalogue that through the definition of addiction, any behaviour, substance or not, that a person craves, I was craving. I was thinking about it a week. Again, that managerial and sort of commentary, inner dialogue would be there, talking about China's performance and how Bolivia haven't been up to their usual standards, and India actually taking that spot there. And if they keep getting those two consistents each game, they just need a third to tip them over the edge if they keep playing like that. And Vietnam are not performing as well as they should be because they're probably the fourth best team, but they're not quite ever getting there. And USA are fairly consistent, although they're not going to win, but they helped battle China when Turkey were there, just not there for a long time. And Turkey... And this is probably the most embarrassing bit, is that in my head I was imagining that I was managing Turkey, that somehow I was the manager of this team, and all the players were there, like organic red lentils. They were the best team, and green lentils, they were pretty good. And then you had the Bulgar, which would help bolster up the team and get that like a little striker that would come on and help defend those things. And sunflower seeds at the time, they were one of the big teams, but then they went over to pumpkins. Anyway, you see what I mean? I'm getting too involved. I sort of forgot that I was doing a podcast. I just was reliving it all then just reliving it again. So absolutely a person craves, totally found pleasure in and relief in being in an environment that I could do that. Despite experiencing the negative consequences, at points it was embarrassing. Other people were doing bagging, and I would be constantly double-checking what they were doing. I needed to know what they were doing as it was coming so I could keep up to date with the scores and run it through. It was disrupting that part. It wasn't disrupting my work because it was as I was walking past, but people would go on lunch and I would sneak up and see what work they'd done just so I could see, did USA get that extra point they needed? Or if Canada, oh my God, Canada have got 2 back. They've just gone ahead and won this out of nowhere. Yeah, this was the things that was going on. And then someone would walk back and I'd feel embarrassed and ashamed and I'd walk away feeling a bit silly. And again, cannot give up. There was no part of me that wanted to give that up. I was very much involved. I was very much in it till the end. That was exactly what I was involved with. I've got one more example of something like that later to come, but that was a big one for me. I said I wanted to keep this kind of nice and concise. I haven't done that, have I? I've just been waffling on about the bloody bagging game, which, if you're interested, China basically demolished everyone. The first game, Turkey won, but then China took it over really, and then the business got sold and things went a bit strange. And Kazakhstan was the last team to score, and they never scored ever before. The most exciting bit was when Lithuania very briefly had organic. What was it? They were organic. Non-roasted buckwheat. I think that's what it was. I think it was non-roasted buckwheat that was country of origin Lithuania for a while, and that somehow they managed to get 3 or 4 points out of that. Just madness, right? Just absolute full-on madness. Oh my God, it's such a strange thing. I tell you what, I'm needing a wee, and I've waffled on a lot longer than I thought, so I think at this point, I reckon I'm going to turn it into 2 episodes. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to disappear for a wee in a moment, come back and do the second one. So if I'll tease you with a couple of things now that I'll talk about next time. I will talk about the last thing that's like Football Manager that I was doing during lockdown that, again, I got heavily obsessed with. I will talk about what makes someone susceptible to addiction, and maybe run through that in terms of my own thoughts and Gabor Mate's and my own personal one. Talk a little bit about trauma that's there and potential solutions to these sorts of things that exist. These are the topics that I will cover on that next show. But before I stop this one, I'm just going to jump into the cycle of addiction. This is one way in which we could probably interpret how to recognize addiction and how to see if this is a part of our lives. It's like a useful tool to notice in your own life if this is something that you repeat over and over again. Again, I'll frame it in that Football Manager way. There's one thing I remember I briefly glimpsed at during the Football Manager that I watched a little bit. I watched a clip of that Football Manager Ruin My Life thing from, what was his name? Tony Jameson, which again is on YouTube. I'll put the link up. But there was a clip in which he's saying, actually, all you're doing in that show, all you're doing when you're playing that game is doing admin. It's just continuous admin over and over again, which is very true and made me laugh. Anyway, that's totally off topic. How to recognize addiction if you're going through and feeling addictions. So there is a cycle in which addiction usually takes place, and it's about 5 steps. The first one being pain. If there is already some kind of pain present, some kind of either immediate pain, something immediately has happened, maybe some deep-seated trauma that rears its head with certain situations, maybe coping mechanisms that aren't quite suited to this way of dealing with things. So pain is usually the start of that cycle. The second, using an addictive agent to soothe and distract. So if you are feeling that pain, rather than taking the time to sit in it and understand it and process your emotions, shopping online or something, or looking at your social media and existing in that, or going out for a cigarette, having a drink of that, turning to that drug, all of the different ways. For me, it could be, thinking about the bagging game, or playing knives and forks in my head, or Football Manager, and thinking, if I was in the middle of a game, totally disappearing down the route of, managerial inner dialogue and thinking about my upcoming games and if I'm in the FA Cup or all of this sort of stuff. That is the addictive agent that we're using to mask that pain at that point. So that's the second one, using an addictive agent to soothe and distract. The third one, temporary anesthesia or numbness. It does the job. It hits the spot. It hits that place you need to do that temporary feeling of relief from the pain, a temporary sidestepping from the pain, a temporary numbness, not feeling that uncomfortableness or that difficulty anymore. Number 4, consequences. Being involved in that, does smoking, is that having that impact on your lungs? Is the alcohol having that impact on the liver? Is that impulsive shopping, meaning you've spent money you don't have? Is social media meaning you're not doing that job you were supposed to do, or you even wanted to do that you didn't do? For me, Football Manager, am I becoming more distant from my relationships? Am I prioritizing that and maintaining that over spending time with my partner, or messaging a friend and talking to a friend, or talking to my family? What are the consequences? Am I skipping a meal, which, at that time I may have been hungry, but for the sake of playing this game? So that's the consequences. 5, shame and guilt, the feeling afterwards, leading to more pain or low self-esteem, and thus the cycle begins again. You've experienced that consequence. I said I wasn't going to have that cigarette. I felt like I wasn't going to do it. I didn't even need it, and I've had it, and it has that impact on me, and now I feel bad. I feel like a bad person because I've done that. I knew I shouldn't have done that shopping. I knew I shouldn't have spent that money, but I've done it now, and now I don't have that money there. I feel bad. I'm a bad person. I told myself to stay off the alcohol. I'm a bad person. For me, Football Manager, I already am aware of these impulses and these feelings floating around my head, and now I've used it. I've used Football Manager, and now I feel a bit more distant from my partner, or I didn't take the time to text that friend. I'm a bad friend. I'm a bad person. I'm a bad partner. And then you're in that place of pain or low self-esteem again, in which you want to anesthetize that. You want to keep that. So what do? You turn to that addictive agent again. So to briefly run through that cycle again: 1, pain. 2, pain, some pre-existing pain. 2, using an addictive agent to soothe and distract. 3, temporary anesthesia or numbness. 4, consequences. 5, shame and guilt leading to pain or low self-esteem, meaning the cycle continues. This is a really good tool to notice. If you're feeling some pain, maybe just take a moment to sit with what you're feeling. What do you want to do? Do you want to jump for your laptop? Do you want to jump for your phone? Do you want to jump for that impulsive exercise? Exercise is a difficult one because and eating as well. These are things that are kind of, I don't like the phrase exercise. I prefer movement, just some kind of movement in your body if you're interested in blue zones and such like that. That it doesn't have to be all about exercise. It's, low impact movement throughout the day is good for a longevity based way of living, living for a long time. That's sort of the blue zone stuff anyway. And also exercise a lot of the time for us is characterized by, it's just not fun, is it? As a kid, you go out and you play football, or you get on your bike, or you hide in trees, or you pretend to be pirates, which I guess is problematic in its own way, or you do, cops and robbers, which again is problematic in its own way, good and evil, all that stuff. And then as an adult, you get your Fitbit and you go, I need to do 25 minutes of cardio, and some people get a lot of joy out of that, but for a lot of people, it's a fucking task to just go, I need to work on my upper body this time and work on my chest, and then a bit of cardio to balance it out, and then a rest day, and then it's more admin, which someone complaining about admin who's talking about being addicted to Football Manager is very backwards, isn't it? Because that is what Football Manager is. It's addiction. It is addiction to admin, and yet I'm complaining about physical admin. Anyway, that went off on one there. But my main point of going off on one there was exercise is obviously a good and wonderful thing, but it can also become addictive, and it depends if you're using it to mask that pain, first of all, and then you use that addictive agent. Temporary anesthesia or numbness, you get the feeling you want. The consequence that comes from that, maybe you've overexerted yourself, maybe you're making different weight issues, maybe it's giving you more body dysmorphic images in your head, maybe you're feeling inadequate and that's the reason you're doing it. And then the shame and the guilt that comes with that, how you should look, how I should be doing this, am I performing it right? And then that starts the cycle again. So that cycle of addiction is a very good, useful one for determining whether you sorry, there we go, there's the cough. Can you hear, would you like this voice? Is this the voice you want? Because if this isn't the voice you want, I'm going to have some lovely, delicious water right now. There it is, hits the spot, and a lovely, soothe voice. Anyway, that is part one of what is going to be a two-parter on Football Manager and addiction somehow. As I say, there's plenty to look forward to. There will be links in the show notes for you to dive into, many of which I probably haven't talked about. But in fact, because I've done this now, I'll probably do an intro and outro there. So I'll do a separate intro and outro out there. But for the moment, I'm going to jump and have a wee. And then I'll be back to record part 2 with you. So yeah, see you in a bit. There we go. That was episode number 14 of the Savage Balance podcast. There will be a part 2 to this coming out next week, already recorded, and it's probably even more informative than the first one, although I think I lost my head a little bit at some point. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to this. Do go and check out all the stuff in the show notes. I'll mention them briefly because I'd go into them more detail in the next one, but there's stuff to do with Mae Martin, a show she did on the BBC, radio and telly, for the Channel 4 actually, that is. There's a few Gabon Mate interviews, there's Johan Hari TED Talk, Blind Boy talks about inherited trauma, I'll get to that in the next episode, Rangan Chatterjee as well, talking about stuff. There's plenty of stuff, so do go and check that out. And thank you very much for listening to this. Share this podcast with your friends. We have a social media, Savage Balance Podcast, and a Twitter, SavBalPod. Email me if there's anything you want to talk about, or if you've got any ideas or thoughts about where you want this podcast to go. It is for you after all, so although it's also for me as well. I bloody love doing it. But yeah, if you've got any thoughts, I'd so love to hear them. We have a website, savbalpod.com. No, I haven't updated it. Well, I'm sorry. I will do at some point. Subscribe, comment, rate, and review. That would be great. The artwork is by Dolly Gray, and the music is by Danny Tonks. I'll be back next week with the second part of this Football Manager addiction waffly rant. Take it easy, guys. Look after yourself during this lockdown and be kind to yourself. Bye for now.